Prologue. It had been said that the world began in a clash of fire and steel. The world tree sprouted from the bones of the giant Ymir, as his blood watered it until it grew into the trunk and branches that supported every world and realm. These were the stories the gods told man, elves, and every manner of creatures under their watch. They were the stories a small elf remembered hearing at the knee of the god Frey, when he lived in the hallowed woods of Alfheim. Anya had been only a child then, amazed by the tales of the war between Aesir and giants, between the Aesir and the Vanir, the battles between dragons and men. Listening to these stories of the early days of the world, Anya had felt safe and secure. Sitting before the hearth, listening to tales told to her by a god who lived among the elves as their protector, she felt as though nothing could touch her. When the Vanir god Frey had come to Alfheim, the elves had been a community of craftsmen and hunters. They lived in the light of the mystic forest and were sustained by its magic. This magic, called Satyr, was a remnant of the creation of the world. It was found on every branch of the world tree, but it was wildest and most potent in the untamed worlds. In Alfheim, it had granted the elves long lives spanning the centuries. It made them nimble, quick, and graceful. In the silvery light of the magic forest, the elves even held the light of the satyr inside of themselves. It was said that those most connected to this magic would shine with a light like the sun. Anya's father, Skirnir, was one of these elves saturated in the satyr. Like him, she too held the connection to the eldritch magic of the wood. As a child, Frey taught her to wield the satyr as a tool, protecting the forest from the raiding parties of men who sought to plunder the riches of the world. For centuries, Anya remembered spending time in Frey's great hall, listening to stories, learning magic, and even practicing with the sword. It was through swordplay that Anya met her closest companion of youth, Rathuel, the son of a great elvish smith. The two young elves were inseparable as they journeyed with Frey to the Fire Mountains in Leifthasir, to the north of Alfheim. There they had studied among the dark elves, creating bonds of friendship with their mountain-dwelling kin. In the Fire Mountains, Frey, Anya, and Rathuel saw the birth of a great weapon, a sword imbued with the very Vanir magic of the god himself. His sister, Freya, had taught the dark elves and dwarves to wield this magic in their craft, and now they had used that to create a master weapon. The sword, Sumarbrander, was crafted before their eyes, and the young elves marveled at its greatness. It seemed as those happy days would never end, until the Aesir called the gods away to the ethereal plane of Asgard. The uneasy feeling that crept into the world when the gods left the mortal planes was inescapable. Anya remembered watching as her father received Sumarbrander, the sword of Frey, and was anointed a regent king until the gods' return. Though she'd heard the promise of a god to one day come back, in her heart, the young elf knew they never would. The world grew colder, and the wood dimmed. Its magic became finite without the majesty of a god to preserve it. Anya watched as her father drew on the magic of the elves to protect the forest, using his strength to renew the warmth and light it had once held. But he struggled to keep the light of the elves and the power of the sword. Word reached the shores of Alfheim time and time again that the Leifthasir of the world were dwindling. The dwarves buried deep into the mountains, the dark elves scattered to the crevices and rocks of the mountain peaks. Trolls were felled by mortal men, and every manner of Huldra, Leifthasir, and spirit were nearly driven to extinction. The gods had abandoned the world, and thus the world was losing its wild mystique. These were the thoughts that haunted the mind of the now regent queen as she stood in the hall of her kin, its open rafters ablaze and the red leaves of autumn were black with ash. The sound of wood snapping and giving way under the heat brought Anya back to the moment. Sumarbrander was drawn. and her body glowed with the magic of Vanir entrusted to the elves. It wasn't a battle she was facing down, but a slaughter, and it seemed as if no magic or great weapon of the gods could have changed this moment. Mortal men had dragged their boats upon the black shores of Alfheim, and with them they brought a great dragon in chains. They unleashed a blaze upon the elves hot enough to melt that black stone beach, boiling the sea as it lapped upon the shore. Their demands were not made with diplomacy. They were shouted from atop the great beast. "Give us the sword of the god!" Even as she had watched the black stones on the beach melt like glass in a kiln, Anya would not release it. "We're taking anyone we can to the boats," the voice of Rathuel called out over the roar of the fire. He rushed towards Anya, sheathing his sword as he approached. "On the northern shore. We're taking the survivors to Leifthasir. There aren't many boats, but we have to try." Anya nodded her head in recognition, looking back at the burning hall around her. The dead that lay on the once pristine white stone floors stared back at her in horror, as if to ask why she had not been able to save them. "We won't be able to save them all." She felt the words burning her throat, as if speaking them was the same as breathing in the acrid smoke around her. Rathuel's eyes met Anya's. They both knew she wouldn't leave the forest while a single elf was left behind. "Just buy us a little time," he said to her in understanding. Rathuel and Anya had been joined together as consorts by her father. Skirnir had feared that the line of the regents would fail, leaving Alfheim unprotected, and the Sumarbrander left to dull in obscurity. Rathuel had been following in his father's footsteps, forging weapons imbued with the magic left over from the creation of the world. These satyr weapons had brought many an adventurer to the shores of Alfheim, and they'd given the elves reason to explore the world at large, outside of the protection of their regent's magic shield. Anya and Rathuel's marriage was intended to protect the magic of Sumarbrander, and one day provide an heir to inherit it. Their friendship had made this political union amicable, but over the centuries their marriage had become one of genuine affection. They traveled back and forth from Leifthasir, keeping their allyship with the Dark Elves strong, learning the secret ways of their Vanir smiths. When Anya's father died, these diplomatic travels stopped. Anya was anointed, as her father had been, to regent. Adventuring men stopped visiting the shores of Alfheim, and the elves lived in seclusion for hundreds of years. The age of seclusion had ended now. It concluded in a blaze of torment. Word of the sword had whispered its way through the lands mortal men inhabited, and its power was now their prey. Standing with Rathuel, watching a group of terrified elves holding what belongings they could carry, sent a shiver to the regent queen, as she was brought back to the here and now. Anya had wanted to kiss him with the joy that he was still alive, but feared it would be the admittance that it was the last time either of them would see one another on this side of Freya's reaping fields. Instead, she squeezed his forearm and nodded curtly yet again, before turning to face the inferno that was the attack before her. The sound of Rathuel and his party of survivors escaping was drowned out by the distant thundering call of the dragon. The dragon had come with the second wave of invaders. Its rider was leading the army in hopes of gaining the power of Frey's sword. The dragon reared against its chains, its molten breath casting fiery ripples through the once lush forest. Anya could feel the heat blistering her skin even as she stood behind the great hall's walls. The army before her was no match for the fight of the elves, but the elves had been no match for the ferocity of a dragon. The regent queen took a deep breath as she cleared the great wooden doorway to the hall and felt herself giving in to the eldritch magic around her. Like her father, she too had tapped into the wood's magic to protect it, and now she hoped there was enough magic left to give her people some time to escape. Her skin blazed with the light from the satyr of the wood, a beacon shining like a sun. Sumarbrander flared, reflecting the light as she lifted it high above her head, catching the attention of everyone fighting in the wood. Thunderous was the sound made by the great winged beast taking flight. Its nostrils flared with fire, Its rider was shouting orders, and he seemed to be barely keeping control of the bloodthirsty drake. Anya stood at the entrance of the hall, watching them, defiantly ignoring the danger to herself. Behind her, she could still hear the survivors trying to flee the hall and make it to the safety of the northern shore. They too were soon drowned out by the dragon now closing in before her. Fire rained down upon her, raising the last remaining supports to the wooden doorways to the great hall. Anya ducked the debris as it clambered to the ground around her. When she stood again, covered in soot and ash, she ran to the dragon only to be met once again with fiery breath. The heat was so intense she could barely believe she wasn't burning, but whatever magic protected her was fading fast. She struck the great beast's chain, causing it to warp under the very flame it directed. The dragon shook its great head, as if it were testing to see if it could break free from the bonds. The rider atop it leaned into the great iron collar it wore, directing its head back to the Elf Queen. Fire again poured over her, the heat coating her in a layer of sweat. Anya shouted, ready to strike again when the dragon's claws raised from the ground, pinning her to the ground. She struggled to free herself as the dragon's mouth grew ever closer. The maw of teeth was large enough to crush her bones and break her body on full display. The weight of the beast bore down on her, and her sight grew dim. She had stood against the invading army and lost. Anya was being pressed into the ground below her, and her sinews were straining and bursting under the pressure of the weight of the dragon. As darkness overtook her, she saw the singing light of an arrow pass over her, a final flurry of motion before she lost consciousness. She could feel the weight of the dragon's clawed feet lift from her and felt the wind of its wings as it lifted from the ground into the air. Drifting in and out of the waking world, Anya knew that she was fading into the dark domain of death. She could feel Frey's sword still gripped in her hand. She was unable to let go, even though she knew the bones in her arm were crushed and her ribs shattered. "You're going to make it." Rothuel's voice echoed through the fluttering light she couldn't seem to see through. He lifted Anya from the ground and turned from the fiery doorways. Rothuel had loosed his arrow upon the great beast's rider, forcing a temporary retreat. He knew he only had a few moments to get Anya to the boats and get her and the sword to safety. "You could have left with the others." The thought came unbidden, like a knife being driven into his resolve. Weaving through the forest, autumn leaves fell around them as if they were unaware of the chaos in the city behind them. The dragon's roar was distant, but the firelight still danced across the water as he reached the northern shore, and he knew it would return. He could see it in his mind, wings beating against the wind, flames scorching everything in its path. "There's still time to board the boat. You could row," he thought again as he placed her on the deck and covered her with a tarp. But the weight in his chest would not let him move. He knew if he climbed aboard, the boat would be a target. They would know he was trying to get her away unseen. He turned back towards the shore, the remnants of the great forest silhouetted against the inferno. Anya had entrusted him with the sword's protection, but had she known what that meant? She'd carried it in her father's halls, and he had seen its light in the hands of kings. He'd forged its scabbard and bound it with satyr and his blood, but he had never held the sword for himself. It wasn't his to carry. But now it was his to save. The dragon roared again, closer this time. Rothuel's heart clenched as he thought of her. The girl who had once bested him with a wooden blade in Frey's hall, who had laughed as she pulled him to his feet again. His friend, his queen, his wife. He tightened his grip on the boat's stern, willing his legs to move. The sword was too important, too dangerous to let it fall in the hands of men. If he saved it, there was a chance the elves could rebuild, that their light might not fade entirely. But if he let it fall, if he faltered now, then everything they had fought for would be gone. The dragon's shadow passed overhead, its wings stirring the waves. The boat rocked, and Anya stirred beneath the tarp, her hand twitching weakly towards the sword. "Go," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You have to go." With a final shove, he pushed the boat deeper into the water, the tide pulling it from his reach. The dragon descended then, its flames arching across the waves. Rathuel turned to face it, his bow already in his hands. There was no escape now, no salvation waiting for him on the horizon. But if he could buy her one more moment, if he could draw the dragon's fire away from the boat, it would be enough. His hands trembled, but his resolve did not. The bowstring sang as he loosened the arrow, striking the beast's wing. The dragon roared, its attention snapping to him. Flames burst forth, and Rathuel braced himself against the heat. In those last moments, he thought only of her, of Anya's defiant smile, her laughter echoing through the halls of their youth. And as the fire consumed him, he prayed to Frey, not for mercy, but for the strength to let go. The fire waned, and there was nothing left of Rathuel. Darkness finally overtook Anya as the boat drifted along the strait between Alfheim and Leifthasir. Her life was given over to the futility of protecting her people from the last of the world's great magical beasts. The sounds of the boat reaching ashore were the last sounds she would hear, but in the deafening silence of dying, she remembered sitting at Frey's knee as he told stories of the great battles between the Aesir and giants, between the Aesir and Vanir, and all the stories of men doing battle with dragons. Did Frey know he was leaving them to endless fighting and wars when he left the sword with the elves? Had he even considered that they might be unprepared for the future that lay ahead of them? Anya watched as the dragon pulled against the giant chains that held it, focused on the battle before it. Perhaps it was they who had been so naive as to think that Frey would have left the world because it was peaceful and safe. The world had been created in fire and blood, and it was fire and blood that continued until the world's end. This concludes the prologue to A Tale of Scorched Ash and Elm by H.F. Day, narrated by William Twitty. If you like what you heard, you can pre-order now at hfdayrights.com and Amazon Kindle. The wide release will be available through Amazon and other online sellers on December 2nd.